talking about womb transplant too, because it's a major event. UK's first womb transplant on a 35-year-old woman, an organ donated by a 40-year-old sister who's had 2 children already. That's right. So the operation lasted over 9 hours at the Churchill Hospital in Oxford. It's been described as a huge success. So let's cross to writer and journalist Caroline Farrow, who joins us now. Good morning, Caroline. Is this cause for celebration? Is this wonderful for all of these women who can't have children?
Oh, I think the words of Jurassic Park come to mind, and that's too busy thinking about whether or not they could to think about whether or not they should. Now, on one level, yes, this is wonderful news for the surgeons, but I think it is fraught with ethical difficulties for a number of reasons. I mean, firstly, I think the risks of such a procedure outweigh the benefits. So, presuming you've got a live womb donor, a woman who wants to give over her womb, then she's got to be in 9 hours of risky surgery. And then, of course, we've got the long operation endured by the recipient. Now, being the recipient of a womb is no guarantee that it's going to be successful or that you're necessarily going to be able to have, children later. And so the recipient then has to take anti-rejection immunosuppressant drugs for 5 years. We don't know what effect that might have on the unborn baby. It's not a permanent solution, so at some point she's going to have to undergo surgery and all the attendant risks of that again in order to have the womb taken out. So it seems to me a very expensive, costly, risky procedure.
Caroline, can I ask you, can I step in there?
Financed for sure on the NHS. And I think the other thing that we don't tend to think about when we're talking about these leaps and bounds in reproductive technologies is that it all leads to the commercialisation and the commoditisation of female bodies. So, originally IVF was to help infertile couples. And now we see in America, for example, women who are coerced, who are sort of financially bribed in order to donate their eggs. And we see this with IVF clinics as well. They try and sort of persuade women that they should be sharing their eggs. I would hate to see a situation whereby women are financially bribed and coerced into giving up their wombs. And as well, we have the spectre in society where there's so much confusion. I don't know why, because we all know what a woman is. But when we have men trying to lay claim to femininity and to being a woman, are we then going to be pushing the boundaries even further and trying to transplant wombs into men? I think there are so many children who are in need of good homes, children in foster care. I'm not deriding anybody who can't have children. I can't imagine how heartbreaking that must feel.
Well, what about, Caroline, let me just pose to you this idea, Caroline, if I can just pause you for a
I just can't see
I'm not sure whether
how this can be justified.
Caroline, if I can just ask you just for a moment about choice, because this might be a woman's choice to have this baby. I know women who... Can you not hear me, Caroline? I don't think she can hear us. I know women who have had the choice to sell eggs to a family that very much wanted to have a child and to be a surrogate. And isn't what you're doing really is just stopping the choice for those couples and those women? I think Caroline's trying to turn off her mute button.
I'm really sorry, I've lost the sound.
All right, Caroline. Well, that's Caroline Farrow. It would have been interesting. That probably explains why we couldn't get any questions.
She had a good say.
She had a good say. She certainly did, because Emma's back with us. Emma, we've talked about the ethical issue about this. There is this big ethical issue involved here, isn't there, Emma Webb?
There are lots of ethical issues involved. I think there are lots of sort of tangentially related ethical issues to do with IVF, also to do with, I think that a line that Mary Harrington said at an event that I did with her not that long ago. She said that pregnancy doesn't just make a baby, it makes a mother. And so the aspect of having a transplanted womb could have all sorts of other effects that would need different ethics. So I think basically this is a very ethically complex thing. And as we've seen with other stories that we've discussed on this show before, very often you see advances without having any of the proper ethical discussion around them. So I think that, I mean, we could go into the ethical issues. I think Caroline very well articulated a lot of the points without you guys even needing to ask any questions. I think that there are all sorts of ethical considerations. You also have to think about things like coercion, the marketisation of organs. So there are lots of related issues that we could discuss.
But can I ask politically, Stephen, about this? Because, look, the NHS is on the floor financially. We don't know how much this procedure will cost. This was paid for by a charity. Should the NHS really be gearing up to give this to women? Presumably vast expense when people are in a queue for cancer treatment, hip replacements, heart surgery.
I mean, as ever, you put your finger on it. Look, it may well have been paid for by a charity. It was about 40 to 60 staff involved in this.
Yeah, huge.
A huge number, a massive, great cohort of medics who could have been doing some other stuff. Now, the thing is, bioethical ethics in this country are in a difficult place because, for example, they've done a woman-to-woman transplant, they could do a woman-to-man transplant. There's nothing in the law that actually stops them doing that at the present time. And I think we really do need to actually step back a bit. And I would never, ever presume to say to any woman, you know, you shouldn't do this, you should adopt. But on the other hand, it breaks my heart every day of the week to see the number of young kids who are in foster homes, in children's homes, who end up very, very often in county line gangs on the streets because they miss a home. I would never, ever presume to
But what I find quite baffling about this procedure is that it only allows the woman to carry the child. It may not genetically be theirs, and they can't give birth. So it's literally, Emma, it's that sort of 40-week period of walking around with a bump. And we've fetishised pregnancy so enormously now in 2023. So why is that worth the risk of harm to yourself, potentially the baby, and potentially to the person you've taken the womb from, just so you can feel pregnant?
I think you do have to ask, because you can understand why a woman would want to have the experience of being pregnant.
Course.
And infertility is a really traumatising thing to experience, whether you're a man or a woman. You can understand why a woman would want to be pregnant, but you do also have to ask, and this isn't featured in any of the discussions that I've seen around this, is whether or not that this is actually good for the baby. What is the impact for the baby? Of course, the baby would be delivered by caesarean section. Maybe she could have 2 children with this womb if she has the caesarean, and then potentially even have the womb removed afterwards.
Will you have to have the womb removed?
I would like to see. I mean, I know obviously there is a lot of research that goes on in this area.
Of course, sorry to interrupt, but that's if the womb had to then be removed as well afterwards. Vast expense again.
And also, I mean, there are lots of things that affect people's fertility widely, things like endometriosis, polycystic ovaries, that could be a focus for research. Whereas, I think Caroline Farrow pointed to this, you can see the argument further down the line, transplant a womb into a man. I don't know how that would necessarily be done, so that a trans woman could have the experience of gestating a child. But there are so many ethical considerations here, not least this kind of sort of transhumanist treating of body parts as if they are, as again, to quote Mary Harrington, as if they are meat Lego, that human beings are just these body parts that can be sort of interchanged. There's an element of playing God. And so even though you can understand, you know, for the woman who's able to carry a child and really wants that, she said she wants to have as many children as she can, you can see how that would be a really emotional and wonderful experience for her. But there are all of these broader ethical considerations that don't really ever get talked about in public debate before we see advances in technology.
Do you think that IVF should even be paid for on the NHS at the moment, Stephen?
In exceptional cases, yes, because the psychological impact on people is so terrible. But, however, what you shouldn't do is do more than 3 terms of it. There are people who just want to go on and on and on. And, you know, I've got good friends, you know, whose lives have been pretty much ruined by it. Now, I can't understand that. But on the other hand, you know, I'm not going to say that they're right or they're wrong. I think there's certain things I mean, getting tattoos removed and things like that, I think it's just downright silly, you know. And I think a lot of you know, sort of cosmetic surgery shouldn't be paid for the NHS. However, I think IVF is an exceptional case, but it has to be limited. It has to be in very few cases, and there has to be where there is a profound psychological impact.
We were talking earlier, you guys, to anti-racism activist Iman Ace.